So my question, mainly for you, Shelley, because we're kind of speaking the same language, just in the context of my fellowship with Education Reimagined. But student voice is kind of ambiguous on the way we're defining it in the spectrum of student voice. Are we giving students the agency or student voice to say, hey, I want to work on this project, or I want to go out in the community, going back to grip tape? So I want to know, just kind of from your guys' expertise, what does the spectrum look like? What's the beginning to really, very transparent student voice? Does that make sense?
I think so, because I think what I hear, and maybe I experience as frustration in a lot of these conversations, is what I see as being a using the idea of student voice when what we really mean is choice or input or participation, right? And so I think one of the questions that we have to remain focused on is, where is the power situated? Who has it, right? Are we only inviting students to participate by completing a survey, or only giving them a choice between pre-selected options of a would you like to do an art project or a paper to evidence your learning? Or are we willing to really be bold and say, should school happen? Right? Like, are we willing to open it all the way up to ask the question about the purpose of school and how it's structured and how it's organized and what learning should happen in the first place? And are we willing to roll with the options that are, been created, right? So to me, a part of it is, and that's really the work with, rather than agency even, I like the idea of a socio-political development and the idea of developing a critical consciousness and understanding how systems work, how you're situated in those systems given your identity groups, and then developing skills to take action. So for me in my work, it's about having students identify the issue they want to solve and then take that up, and it can be taken up in multiple ways, and sometimes that means shutting down the school board meeting, and sometimes that means proposing a policy and negotiating with adults about it.
Thank you.
I would just like to introduce the concept that our organization is pretty committed to, which is Youth Adult Partnership, which actually, must start with the elevation of young people as authentic agents of change. And the authenticity matters. I guess our belief in partnership is the answers to change must come from all stakeholder groups. That no group, we've made young people mute for years. When we empower young people to be authentic partners in change, if we at the same time make adults mute, we have lost, in a similar way, half of the equation. I think both groups need to be able to work in partnership with many fundamental shifts in mental models, in power, in the quality of what happens when they're engaging with one another. But if we somehow lose one group for the other, I think our solutions will be diluted. And the thought of but no one is toxic to the right answer. Everybody has a piece of the solution. So we really go with partnership and envision schools where it's seamless. The mutual respect, the involvement, the responsibility, and that's what we try to live in the actual initiatives that we instigate, so that people feel what it feels like, and it feels really different.
You've got a question.
I can tell.
Good.
Hi, my name is Jaden Dio. I'm one of the students at Dana. Flew out from Iowa, so I'm happy to be here. My question is, how do we break down the barrier of tokenism? How do we start to move past just bringing students onto, say, a school board and having them be a student representative, and actually start to make them a part of the system?
Thank you. Some answers from the panel, please.
Well, first of all, it's so important that we understand from the research the dangers of tokenism. So we invite youth to the table and we alienate them. We are creating a bigger problem than we had in the first place. And I think also critical to, it's not just having young people, but which young people. So, for example, if you are a school that wants to understand why our ninth graders failing, then you should be partnering with the failing ninth graders, not the student council stars. They're the ones that's going to tell you what the structural inequalities are, what the problems are in their school, and they're incredibly articulate and ready to do so. So it's being well aware that the range of young people that we're working with has to be much broader. In fact, the folks we should be working with are the ones that are struggling in the system if we really want to change it. So there's tokenism even in terms of what youth we choose. I think we also need to be willing to pay young people for their time as much as adults, and that we need to have structural ways for that to happen. In my research, looking at ways that student voice efforts are sustained, really strong findings of the importance of nonprofits, or something we call intermediary organizations. So without getting into the theory too crazy about it, if you think about how schools are pulled in a million different directions and are responsible to a bunch of different things, a nonprofit like Helen's can hold the mission of the power of young people at its core. So if schools partner with nonprofits and IOs for whom that's the mission, then it helps that student voice work to continue forward, because those, I call them wizards, Helen's one of them, and there's a bunch of wizards in the room, so look around and try to find out who the wizards are. But these nonprofit leaders who are like leading the charge and saying, no, you need to believe in young people and kind of hold schools accountable for that. And then the US system, without the laws behind us, a lot of times it's these nonprofits that hold the space for the work. Or Shelley's involved in research practice partnerships where sometimes it's university folks doing that work. But someone outside the structure of the system can help to prevent the tokenism from occurring and keeping the authenticity. That's what the research shows.
Okay. I had a question. I don't know who could answer it, but I was assuming that Dr. Zion would be able to answer it best. One of the things that I focus on, and you can ask data, I focus on student disciplinary policies. Every paper, like literally ever is about that, because I felt like being a student in the inner city, I like realized how just crazy student disciplinary policies are. So I wanted to ask, how could student voice help reimagine or reform student disciplinary policies in a way that would help rehabilitate students instead of punish them?
So the interesting thing with that question is I spent several days in the last few weeks working with a group of middle school students at a school over in South Jersey. These were the 12 students who have a wicked number of discipline referrals, the highest numbers in their schools. And so we have been working together almost for a day each week to ask that exact question, you know, like what's not working with the discipline policies, who needs to do what differently, how do we do that? And so they have created a bunch of scenarios about things where they've been collecting data and just doing observations of their own interactions with adults, of other interactions that teachers are having with their peers, writing those in a thickly descriptive manner, free of inference to the degree that they can. And we're going to use those at the beginning of the school year. We're going to continue to refine those, and we're going to use them at the beginning of the school year to role play with teachers after we identify the themes and patterns across them about what it is that's happening and what is it then that teachers need to know and think about differently in terms of the way they approach discipline. How do kids need to think differently about how they're engaging, responding, etc. So hopefully for next year, the work of that school is really focusing in on what needs to change around discipline policies, understanding of climate and culture and interactions. But these sixth graders who have been the ones most frequently suspended and expelled are the ones leading that conversation.
Any other questions that you've got for our panel? Yeah, something right there. This is getting aerobic for me, which is kind of good.
My name is Andrew Nalani. I am a doctoral student at New York University, and it's my first time here, so I'm glad to be here with all of you. My question is for any folks in the panel, particularly folks in the researcher role. What if you knew what you know now about this field? What is a nugget of wisdom that you would want to give yourself back then about what it means to be a researcher navigating two systems that might not necessarily be friendly to the way we understand student voice, youth adult partnerships, particularly as we navigate scholarship and practice together, and how to do that dance as an emerging scholar.
Thank you. Anyone from the panel, please respond.
This is a loaded question.
That's a hard question. What would I tell myself 100 years ago? I think that probably the thing that I have learned the most over the course of time that I've been doing this is that as much work as we put into building the critical consciousness and skill of the young people, we need to spend at least that much working with adults on how to sit down, shut up, right? Like, because even adults, and I think that's one of a project that we've been doing for the last 2 years in another district, that some doc students here that are participating in that. Adults who really, really, really want to do this have a really hard time figuring out how to put their power aside and to really address that and to be comfortable giving it up. So adults get in the way all the time, even while they're saying that they really, really, really support it and value it.
I think for the direct research question, my advisor described this kind of work as being on the diagonal. And I think that's really helpful in that it doesn't necessarily fit into a field or a genre. I think that has worked to my advantage in terms of publications because I'm like the quirky one usually. But it's been extremely hard to get grants and funding as a result because grants are usually the objectives are determined by the grant makers and you have to align yourself with them. So I think being creative and finding ways for I use a lot of analogies. Like I can talk to teacher communities about my work because student communities are like teacher communities. So I would say from the researcher side, the biggest struggle has been to get grants and funding, as I think would be true for the nonprofits and the teachers in the room and all of us. So finding the funding to do this work is some of the harder things, although we do have some foundations that support youth activism, which is wonderful. And having to be really creative in terms of how you position yourself as a faculty member of what this work is and what you're doing is something that I'm happy to talk with people about.
I think one of the things that we started to focus on when we first launched Grip Tape, and some of the things that we had in our ear was that it's not realistic, it's not gonna work. And that came from a lot of adults, and they were like, you can't possibly give students the opportunity to be in the learner's driver's seat only because they're not old enough, they don't get it, they don't know what they need. So we have to be there as adults to make sure that they know what they need. So one of the things, even though I'm not as in the research world, that I would say is that there's a lot of unlearning to do. And I've learned that not only within the adult community, but within the youth community as well, because we start to internalize the fact that we're not supposed to be the ones who are in the learner's seat. We're not supposed to be in this role, we're not supposed to do this, I'm not supposed to be here right now, you know what I mean? So I think that it's a lot of unlearning on both sides. So the youth have to unlearn the idea that they have to be put in their place, and that the adults get out of the idea, just like you were saying, that they have that place and that power, and that's the only thing that they have.
We have a question back here.
Hi, my name is Yamaya. My question was in SBC, what we focus, well, that student was collaborative. What we focus on is youth adult partnerships, but I kind of just want advice because something I realized in youth adult partnerships is that, like, once we propose an idea as students, the teachers kind of just sit back and, like, make us come up with an idea or how to solve it on our own. But then once we're done coming up with the idea, we have to go through their approval and then their critique and, like, how can we, like work together since it's a youth adult partnership instead of just like having to.
Thank you very much. Can we have a response from the panel, please?
I just think that's an example of why adult partners who are there to be able to share what their piece of the puzzle is, which is often these crazy political infrastructures and decision-making processes that are part of a process of change, that they can offer some of the solutions to be able to finesse that as change agents. So open doors, so that it's testimony to the quality and integrity of that partnership and who plays which role to get to the end game that actually does shift the culture itself.
Thank you. A question back here, one over there. Please go ahead.
Okay. Hi, I'm Christine Sturgeon. I'm a teacher librarian from Iowa, and I'm board president of Iowa Student Learning Institute. And so, first, what is the name of your organization? Like, Grip
Tape.
How do you spell that?
GRIPTAPE. So just like the stuff on the skateboard.
Okay, because that's what I was trying to.
Yeah.
Is it griptape.org, maybe? Okay. Thank you. And then, Dr. Mishra, I think early on you said, when you were talking about the research, that student activist research wasn't as open. Can you expound on that? What does that mean? Welcoming, I think you said. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say just I think in terms of like who cites who, like the school-centered work cites the activists, but they don't cite it. And just in terms of like meetings and things like that, and who gets invited where, things like that. There's just, I feel like the conversation goes in one direction and not as much in the other. I think a reason for that is a frustration by the activists of norms and paradigms that aren't enough about critiquing, questioning, and of incremental change not being enough in this current society. I think that's where it comes from. But I would just love to have more dialogue across disciplines in that way within this field. Like, we don't need silos. That's my thought.
Hi, I'm Jono. I am coming from Dallas, Texas, and Shana, I really appreciate that you talk about unlearning. That's the work that I do is primarily in the adult unlearning space, or at the campus level, the classroom, the campus, and the district level. So I'd love to hear about some of the primary levers in doing that work of unlearning and reformatting adult mindsets toward this work.
We have worked pretty hard to create vehicles for dialogue around exploring implicit biases. And so we have a rubric and activities that really begin to open the door and make the implicit explicit around that dynamic, and then be guardians of it, so that the shift happens, it's tended, the process is as tended as the work itself and its outcomes. So we need to give a language to it, and we need to be able to be honest and let people feel okay that they haven't evolved fully to a place that they may wish to be. And then let the journey happen. But safety and clarity, what that journey is, and making that clear to people is tools is what we offer, and it starts before it seeds the beginning of every work process.
Hi, my name is Anika Manzoor. I'm the Executive Director of the Youth Activism Project, and I wanted to continue on this question of unlearning, but from the youth side. So one thing my colleague and I, Wendy over there, struggles with is the socialization of young people to just kind of appease adults and parrot back what they think adults want to hear. And so how do we as adults encourage them to push back and really express their opinions, while also recognizing that adults have to do that continuous process of learning at the same time.
Thank you.
Well, I just have a very brief response to that because I'm also very interested in that question. But something that actually Harry and I both talked about this morning, so it's interesting that it's coming up, is just because a student has voice doesn't mean that they disrespect their teacher or their elder or anything even close to that. It's a matter of we have an opinion and we want to co-collaborate. So I totally agree with what you're saying. I think we need to find that balance between respect and having a voice and authentic youth and adult partnership.
One thing I can say is that responses, especially from children, students, things like that, are learned responses. And because I've been in this situation and I've seen you react this way when I give a suggestion like this, I want to do this in order to avoid having that reaction from you. So I think one thing that we have to really start doing, and it's honestly creating that environment and allowing students to start to build that trust, to let them know that this is an environment in which you can share. And trust is a very fragile thing, right? So when you are in that predicament, if there is a suggestion that you really don't agree with and then you react negatively, that's only reinforcing and teaching the students that they shouldn't have this voice, because at the end of the day, you're still the top authority person. So I think that's one thing that we really have to do, is start practicing as adults and really creating those environments that allow you to actually have those experiences and reinforcing the fact that their voices are relevant and heard and valid.
Thank you to our first panel. We give them a round of applause. Thank you, moderator.
Just really quickly. I don't know about you, but there's many a morning when I wake up and I feel truly, from the bottom of my heart,